Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone.
So,
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337, the special edition for the third Tuesday of the month with Matt Lee of PAX 8. Welcome to the show.
man, it's always great to be here, brother. This is one of the highlights, I think, for me, because it's discourse, right? You and I
Yeah.
often get into some degree of discourse on something. We both have, similar but dissimilar outcomes, but very interesting talks and how we get there. So I enjoy this. This is one of my favorite highlights.
I have to say I enjoy it as well. I think one of the things that makes this extremely valuable, and it's not just talking about CIS controls, I think that one of the challenges a lot of people have in our space is being willing to be vocal about a differing of opinion when they are, I don't want to say intimidated, but they're like,
Sure.
but you're the expert or you're the most resource, whatever.
You know what, though? I think what you're calling out is exactly that, is that I'm not an expert.
Right.
I think about it. I change my thoughts. I grow. I learn. It's an assumption. But the point is, we should always be willing to bounce ideas off each other as professionals, even if it's Matt and Chris, or if it's anybody, right? Is having that ability to have that conversation.
I actually heard Wayne Selk say this, and I really love the statement because if you ever talk to like Kevin McDonald, he's like, "Do not call me a subject matter expert because in the world of cybersecurity, tomorrow I'm the dumbest person in the room because I didn't know about that 0 day."
But I feel it, bro. Well, not even just that 0 day, but what changed and what platform delineations and how things changed. Like, even imagine going from what we're going to get into today on Control 5, where what is an identity? Well, that identity plane grew some silos, didn't it? Right? Like, there's way more identity planes than what it used to be in time. And anyways, but yeah.
So the term that Wayne used that I very much like is subject matter resource.
Yeah,
we are subject matter resources that we hope people will
you know
leverage, right?
I use subject matter student. And even though that might portray well, then why would I want you if you're just a student? I like that as an opener to say we all should still be students in cybersecurity, period. It's always.
Well, remember, a third degree black belt is still a black belt in karate or whatever the discipline is. And I'm going to tell you right now, if I'm not any belt, I should probably not mess with a third degree black belt. And yet that person still has not achieved
their top level.
The top level, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. 100%. So you hinted at it. We have made it through 4 controls. We are now to control 5. Many of you that listen to this show know that Matt and I and Matt on his own as well have done some really deep dives on what is it? Why are we doing it? How are we supposed to get it done? What's the proof and the evidence that goes along with this? So obviously there's a lot to be said here. We have 30 minutes or so to go through this. And obviously I think to the way we've approached this before, we're going to emphasize implementation group 1. But I think after you hear
this is one, though, where we are going to get into some of the IG2s, because I think they should be IG1s, in my opinion. But that's okay.
That's fair. I don't care if we go beyond IG1. I think I was really going to highlight the exercise that we've done in the in-person events have really revolved around IG1, largely for time.
Yep.
And similar today, we could say if we run out of time, we're going to hit the IG1s first. Well, they're in sequential order. We're going to hit the IG1s first, and then talk a little bit about sort of an approach that we haven't really spent much time on in the previous controls, largely because we didn't use control 5 as our example. But to just kind of talk through a little bit, like, what is the outcome that is expected to be found because of your approach to going through this exercise? And so I think, Matt, maybe if you would just kind of tee off a little of the background of the game, if you will. Not the game, the show, but the game.
Sure.
Okay.
So one of the things that I was trying to capture was what me and a few brilliant humans did at our MSP to look at something we were trying to accomplish, break it apart into its constituent components, and then walk down that path to how we were going to solve it. And so what you and I built, Chris, was camera change, bro. That's slick. What you and I built was a way to look at a safeguard underneath one of the controls. And it comes from this context of saying, the top level of a control is really more of an idea, a thought, or a call to action. Then the overview helps you define it. And then a safeguard massively gives you those little contextual exemplary items that say this is what you might want to look at. But they're not meant to be authoritative. But even then,
anything but, right? It's somewhat prescriptive, but it's an idea around achieving an end result that puts you in a position of being able to defend a more secure state.
Yeah, to be defensible, right? But the point being is when you look at this control 5 from that lens, we took this exercise. I'm sorry, going back. Sorry, we took this exercise from first look at the words in this, and to your point, we used 5 as our example because it was a really good one when we first demoed this a few months ago, and say what's the what in this safeguard. What is the what? And so if you're talking about something
like what?
Yeah, like what's what? And we'll just walk through it real quick. So let's take a look at like 5.1, let's say. 5.1 says establish and maintain an inventory of accounts. What is the what? The what is inventory of accounts. Establish and maintain an inventory of all accounts. All accounts is our what, right? And so the point is you break down these whats and you put them over on a sticky note on a big paper that we have, and you say, here's the what we have to solve.
And pause for a minute, because let's rewind. We jumped into safeguards, but to let everybody know, the overview for account management is use processes and tools to assign and manage authorization to credentials for user accounts, comma space, including administrator accounts, comma space, as well as service accounts to enterprise assets and software.
Which means you now have a referenced variable. And if you go back to that reference variable in control 1 and in 1.1, it prescribes user devices, mobile and portable, static devices, servers, right? The cell phones, IoT, everything that you could think of is in that first category.
And after ChannelCon and the panel that we had there on IoT, IoT and OT, I think it's safe to say we can stop creating silos of device types and start focusing on
anything.
Anything that can connect. Well, we've said this.
Well, and it says it in 1.1, it says comma space with the potential to touch, store, or process data, period.
So that's really how we need to approach it. Like we're no longer using words like IoT, right? We're just saying does this thing process? Absolutely, yes. There we go.
Right. So let's continue on. So 5.1 or 5, when you're talking about that, says all enterprise OSs and software. And so when you think about that, that encompasses 2.1 as well in this, right? So when you're talking about 5.1, you're literally talking about anything a user identity or identifiable object exists. You must now have this in your purview for 5. So let's just continue. Go ahead. And then we'll talk about the game.
You're just keep going. You might as well.
So the point is, once we get a what of this, let's say one of these safeguards, we then look at it from the lens of, as practitioners, Chris and Matt, we say, okay, how would we accomplish this? If I'm asked to use unique passwords, which we'll see here in a bit, how do I accomplish that? Well, the first people think immediately, I'm going to buy a password manager. Fair.
Right.
That's probably going to be an outcome. But what about the other things? What about the how? Well, maybe I need a password policy that says you need to record your passwords in a password manager and you need to have this level of password and you can't have them reused because they need to be unique. Well, you need that. First, it sets this governance aspect to some extent and begins that path. You also might want to say, I'm going to have a review period of validation that they are actually using them that way. We're going to log in with a user by the manager and sit there and say, hey, once a year, we're going to check to make sure that you don't have the same password reused 12 times by using that inside this system. Things like that.
Well said. I think there's 2 things that I like to highlight for people going through CIS controls. And one of them is anytime you see the phrase process or plan articulated in a safeguard or even at the control level, there's a real good chance that you're probably also defining a set of rules or a policy that says this is how we're going to address this control. And I think sometimes we can get too far into working through safeguards and not realizing that we've gone way outside of scope because we didn't actually define scope when we started to go through this process.
Well, and moreover, oftentimes people will, and you and I've seen this happen when you're talking about something where you have to have a list or a process, and actually I got approval to use process, so I'm going to use it again. I met with Calvin Engine. He's a real Canadian, and he gave me approval. No, he gave me the approval. This is on loan.
Just move
on loan. Anyways, but the point is
I have dual citizenship now.
I don't think I'll go that far. I don't think the Queen's tapped me on the shoulders, but I do think, or King now, I suppose we'd have to change. But the thing is I I think when we're talking about this safeguard and I lost my point because we had too much fun there, but from the how perspective, it then should translate to a tool as respective of that. To your point of the policy piece and to, having this governance in place, these are going to be your evidence pieces. These are going to be your proofs. Like it has to match. They have to be the thing you can gather evidence from.
And I know what your point was going to be that you lost track of. It's the tool. You said it, the tool. It's what happens when we see this over and over again. We do this exercise, and where do people gravitate?
Yeah, first to the tool. Instantly.
Absolutely.
I would do this with my RMM. Really, your RMM is going to see every device that exists. They have an agent or a purview on everything. Are there other things we might want to consider? Are there other things that we can use as data sets? Like, don't go to the tool first. Go to the objective. Go to the goal, the how, to some extent.
It also makes me think about when you think about privacy and what data types you're looking for, and like, hey, what data types do we collect? Oh, we take in first name, last name, email address, a couple of things. It's like, oh, does your RMM tool identify that way when it's looking at devices and assets? No, it does not. It's not. Right. It does not have emotional or any sort of contextual intelligence around knowing what you're looking for. It can't know what you're looking for.
Right.
You can only tell it what to look for.
So, true story. Exactly that. They do a good job of trying to create the most useful things and make it easy, but you're right. Sure. It's a tool to be used. Okay, so I want to talk about 5 real quick and dig in, so we don't want to waste too much time on this, but single sign-on in the opening statement, they have a guide under procedures and tools when you start reading these safeguards, right? So why is this control critical? And then it gets into procedures and tools. The paragraph that stands out to me is SSO, single sign-on, is convenient and secure when an enterprise has many applications, including cloud applications, which help reduce the number of passwords that a user must manage. Users are recommended to use password manager applications to securely store their passwords and should be instructed not to keep them in spreadsheets, blah, blah, blah. MFA is recommended for remote access. The reason I like this one so much is it actually almost tells you how 5.3 manages 5.6 and 5.6 manages 5.3. And we'll get into that here in just a second as we dig through these safeguards, right? So in the sense that SSO is first called out in 5.6, and I'll just go ahead and read it real quick for everybody's edification. 5.6 says centralized account management. Well, to understand account, we first have to talk about AAA, right? AAA is authentication, authorization, and auditing. And so when we talk about that, this is the first piece. 5.6 is the authentication aspect of this. And when you have centralized account management, it means you have an identity provider or an IDP. That's either going to be Okta, Microsoft, Google, whoever it is, right? Jump Cloud. There's tons of different identity providers out there. And then that is going to go to some service provider, an SP, that consumes that identity provider's identity. What that means is I have one identity that is managed in one control plane with one reporting and view plane, with one ability to gather forensics plane and see timelines in immutably the same time because they were produced in the same time factor. So 5.6 says now I have less things to do when it comes to doing 5.2 because I don't have different passwords because there's no other mini mats.
Well, and I think here's a good place to point out where we started the conversation around Control 5 in general is you discover real quickly how many silos are going to be found, right? You got your AWS and your Azure AD and the fill in the blank and so on and so forth. And to your point, because of the central account management, and assuming you've done 5.5, 5.5, where you've inventoried where your accounts are, this goes back to those silos, you can now have true centralized management, right? Assuming they play together.
Well, and it's really more that there's already standards. And so what the reality is, as long as they're using OIDC or OpenID Connect or OAuth or SAML or any of those, they allow me to centralize that identity, right? And it's easy to do. So I think the standards are being used and the identity providers are getting really good at this. So you're starting to see a lot more. That combined with a lot of SaaS consumption. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about that's a little bit maybe controversial is when we talked about those silos. And we talked back about that. 5.1 says establish and maintain an inventory of accounts. An inventory of all accounts managed in the enterprise. The inventory must include both user and administrative accounts. Inventory minimum should contain the person's blah, 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 all this information. Validate that all active accounts are authorized on a recurring schedule at minimum quarterly. So when we're talking about this, when you talk about SSO again in that lens, it makes 5.1 significantly easier because you've gotten rid of having to review a password manager for 72 items that someone uses. It's now 70 of those are now OIDC based, and I just click and sign in with my user identity, right?
Right.
So it's that. So, but that's not the controversial part. But when you talked about your silos, the silos we came up with, and the 8 times now I've done this presentation. It's an audience presentation where I ask you, the audience, to participate, right? And so, and you've helped me. I'm speaking to I'm breaking the fourth wall here. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I think no, this is good.
So when we ask, the first silo is your IDPs. That's going to be AD, AAD, Okta,
Right.
whatever, ping, name them, right? The second category is going to be those SaaS applications whereby you have not used that. Why? Because when I sign in with mlee at somecompany.com and I sign in there with a username and password at this SaaS vendor, like let's just say
Right.
Dropbox, then I have another copy of me. That's another me that must be tracked, right? And a different password. So now we get into looking at
I just want to pause right there because there's
Yeah.
something about what you just said that I think is really important, especially for solution providers that are implementing this with clients. Remember that some products that have been deployed weren't always deployed with SSO in mind or SSO.
And that's one of the
first.
questions I ask in my mapping of vendors of, do you disable old local user accounts?
There you go.
Once I use SSO. So
or even better, there's another
Yeah.
one to add on top of that. The ones that say, oh, well, we still have contractors or we still have these third-party resources, and the vendor doesn't have a way to restrict. So if it is third-party contractor, that they may have different set of rules than those that are part of the organization.
And you're also going to get into 5.3 with that. But let me come back to my first statement. We'll jump over there. Right. So we've got these categories, these silos. The first one being the identity providers, second one being these SaaS softwares you talked about. Third one being that same software where I log in through my username on Windows, but then I actually have to type in another username into this application for like my EMR or Patterson Dental or whatever it may be. That's another identity, right? Because it's not tied to my SSO. It's not a SaaS app, but it is a local user on an application. So that's the third category.
So
Yep. The fourth category that our audience came up with, if you remember, was local accounts on devices, which is a category in and of itself. And I agree, that's like your switches, your IoT, your local devices on Windows. And back to your point, the local SaaS identities before going SSO fall in that category. And then this last category that came up on stage the other day, and I gave the guy super kudos for, was
you gave him a free PAX 8 t-shirt. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah, totally. Right.
Imagine everyone.
I gave him like Matt high five. I don't know if that's worth anything.
You gave him your t-shirt?
No, I did not. But the point being, in the new category he came up with is the local user on a cell phone that I carry. Right. If I'm an employee of yours and I have my own cell phone and I'm signing in with my username and password and PIN and things on that device and user, that's an identity on my cell phone. And it might also be a very personal identity that's easily compromised. And so it goes into some of these interesting extra categories, which I thought of. But the point is, these silos.
That just made my head spin a little bit.
It did, because it's not an enterprise account that has access to data by direct, but it is one that, depending on your configuration, might have one by proxy.
And
right?
also often exploited in the wild.
Yeah. So anyways, didn't mean to delve down that rabbit hole. But back to your point of that service account set, when we look at 5.3, 5.3 says disable dormant accounts, right? Delete or disable accounts that are after a period of 45 days of inactivity. Well, that does help with that contractor, right? In the sense that, in theory, if they're not doing the work, they wouldn't be signing in, and as such, they would be disabled. Now, you should also have ways to get rid of accounts. We'll deal with that in the later categories.
If we want to.
Yeah. No. But 5.3 does say that. One of the things that you and I came up with that's a real challenge with this, though, with disabling dormant accounts, is specifically that there's some accounts you want to be dormant, right? Like my break glass accounts. I want those to exist. I want those to exist with extremely long passwords, protected and hopefully hard to access and easily told if it is accessed. And so when you deal with that, like, I think you have to be able to look at these safeguards with a bit of this practicality. And that's why at the end of this one, it says comma space where supported. And that where supported may be more than just, does the company allow for me to set up disablement of accounts? This is also, 5.3 is also one of those questions I'm asking vendors on my mapping of, do you allow, or do you set up and structure the ability to disable dormant accounts? Now, if it says so, what can I do? I can actually now do that at the SSO provider, right? Like, I can actually disable that account back at my own SSO.
What I like about the whole centralized account management is this is one of, we talk about CIS all the time, but this is a good example of this control safeguard crosses many, many, many frameworks.
I thought you were going to say this actually proves your chutes and ladders method, but it actually does. This is one where I would argue,
go back to the beginning,
that it makes 5.6 makes 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5
Validates it.
all easier.
Yes.
Way
Well,
easier.
and it
If you
validates that
implement
you're doing
5.6.
it.
Yeah,
right?
it
Like,
does. It does. It's also your proof point. It's also
Right.
literally your actual piece of evidence.
We're
for
like,
this, right?
peace
Like,
out. If you did 5.6, we don't need to talk about
let
this
me make
anymore.
people understand this. So let's do a real quick story.
All
so
right.
you have two incidents you're dealing with. One, this is Chris's company because he has bad practices.
Yep.
Chris
True
has no
story.
SSO, and his user got compromised, and the password manager was SSO, and they did have access to it, or it was left in the browser. You can create your own story card.
Sure.
But this user, now they're trying to determine where did someone go with those passwords? What all did they touch? That means that I, as an incident responder, am going to go sign into the administrative side of 50, 60 applications
Right.
that you're signed into and gather logs in their own format, their own login capacitance, their own stuff to see what was touched. Versus Matt's company, which is a smart company. That may have been accidental. I was trying to pick it in my head, but Matt's company, right, has SSO. And so what do I do to find out what was touched? I go to one Azure identity log and search for the sessions that were created and touched. And I will have each of those applications that was touched in one unified plane with whatever good or bad logging features are available to it, right? You looked at the Purview ad from Microsoft and all that. But the point is, those two companies are in such a different advantage structure for fighting the adversary, aren't
right.
they? Right. So yeah.
And this kind of goes, I mean, I feel like there was a little bit of your actual previous MSP in there with the number of applications that
they were very accurate. I think we had 67 applications.
60, yeah. Not to like point out all of them.
No.
But I think this is you're bringing up something though, like when you were an MSP of 5 or 10.
Yeah.
That wasn't nearly as big of a deal as it was when you became one that has, 67 apps and maybe, 100 plus employees, right?
I would agree, but I also wouldn't have. I wish I had known then what I know now.
Well, I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this. My point is, like, if as a 5-person company today, as an average MSP size of what we see out there, if you were to follow the methodology and strategy you just described with SSO and really emphasizing the importance of that, whether you have 10 apps or 100 apps, who cares if they're all in SSO? Now, we got a different problem if you got 100 apps, but the reality is that management model is reasonably doable with the same number of resources,
and it scales
right?
And it scales easily.
Yes,
I think if anything, most of the work I did when trying to convert to SSO was the challenge of converting to SSO. Because now you don't know what it's going to do to the user objects. Is it going to destroy them? Is it going to create and keep their history? Or are we going to have to fight through email address changes? Or maybe the name doesn't. Anyways,
so let's not run out of time on. We haven't really touched on 3 of the safeguards. So 5.3, disable dormant accounts. I think we kind of said like you should do that. 5.4. This one I think is a little bit more important. Restrict administrator privileges.
It is. This is a critical
one. Admin accounts.
Yeah, bro. This is such a critical one. I'll stand on this one. And it's also one of the ones that proves my point that security is about hearts and minds, and it's not about the dollar. Because here's why. This one says restrict administrator privileges to dedicated administrator accounts on enterprise assets. We go back to that giant menagerie of what's an asset. Conduct general computing activities, comma space, such as internet browsing, comma space email, comma space productivity suite use from the user's primary non-privileged accounts. So you have 2 things coming out right now. You have from that statement that I must have a me that is public and a me that can do admin things that is not public. You're basically saying I will have a persona of both if I need admin rights at all. And the statement is, this is where just simply taking away admin rights from all of your users and finding a good, healthy way to ensure they have exactly what they need when they need it and do not need admin rights changes the tide of battle so much. If I land on a machine with local admin rights, I will win. There will be enough factors in my favor that I can get under the EDR, quite likely, that I can do things that allow me to surreptitiously work within that space, where compared to if I don't have local admin, I probably trigger a lot of things trying to get to admin, right?
So let's highlight that for a second. I've been through some wonderful B words, I words. I don't like to use them out loud because I don't want anybody to think something of me.
Right. It wasn't I would judge you very harshly.
And it wasn't in this particular case. It wasn't me.
Unless an attorney said it was a B word, then I'm fine.
I had a few calls.
Clear to use. You're fine.
Anyway. So here's the interesting thing to what you said about having especially local accounts. If my local account, Chris, let's just say it's Chris admin or Chris, and that's the account I log in with, but I also have that user with privileges, say in the domain environment.
Yeah.
they don't need to know the password. They just need to capture the hash and
That's
then
correct.
apply
Well,
it.
maybe, but likely.
So this is what happened to this particular company.
Yeah.
The local admin user that
Had
was
signed
used to
in.
configure them to the machine and then join it to the domain
Yep.
had the same password. So they were able to piggyback local use. It's just a good example of saying, like, you don't need that user, then
Right.
don't use that user account because it
It's a great
will come
extra
back to
point.
bite you.
Yeah. Well, and that's also the argument of why you see like companies like Microsoft have a SAW or a secure admin workstation, which is also
Sure.
a safeguard, right? It's not in the fives, but
They're
in
not
this
using that to just
understanding,
randomly connect to stuff, right? Let's
yeah,
get
yeah,
stuff
you're
stored on
only
it.
using that. And I also want to talk about why this matters. Well, let's say I'm going to go attack Chris. If I go research on LinkedIn, I'm going to go get his information. I'm going to find where he works. I'll probably find in one of a menagerie of ways what his email address is at work.
Yeah.
And I will then target him. And if I gain access, I will have admin rights to do what I want to do. Instead, if I target Chris and he's not an admin, and again, to Chris's point, he hasn't signed in and exposed the hash, which, by the way, there isn't a hash challenge when you're AADJ directly because it's not like an NTLM hash that's stored in some form or fashion. It's actually a little bit harder to get to. But either way, the point being,
So
yeah.
Before we go to the last safeguard that we really haven't talked about, I wanted to just touch on something you said: the targeting of Chris Johnson or whoever it is that you're targeting.
Whoever it
right?
is, the mat lead
So
or whatever.
So we heard Scott Augenbaum speak at ChannelCon, and he talked a lot about the things that we can do, like that. A lot of these things are preventable. Good cyber hygiene, the secret to cybersecurity. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is when you see those emails that are like, "Oh, this is from Matt Lee," because it says Matt Lee in the alias, and it says, "Hey, Chris, sorry, I'm out of town right now." Yeah, they haven't compromised you, but if you and I are on the same leadership executive team and you're communicating with this fake email to us and you convince us to do something, we just got social engineered into doing exactly
you've got to stop Johnny foreshadowing Control 9. We're not there yet, Mr.
I understand. I understand.
But you're right.
But
we're going to get there. But you're 100%
again,
accurate.
foreshadowing 9 is a reminder that these things come up long before you actually are dealing with that control,
that is
right?
true.
So whether it's 5 or 1
and it's because
2,
you're taking the lower hanging fruit that needs to get done first.
Absolutely.
You're doing the things that's the good.
If this was handled well at 5, then 9 is less likely to be a compromise or a compromise of escalated privileges, right?
Well, so, nine being the
email and web browser.
Email and web browser protections. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So last safeguard that we didn't talk about previously.
I do want to finish that thought though. Real
fine,
quick.
Go for it.
5.4. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
so
you do it.
5.4. What I was getting at is if I then wanted to target Chris's admin user and he had not used it in that capacitance or he's on a system where it wasn't going to be stored, right? Then now that admin user that's there isn't as easily targetable from an open source intelligence perspective. I can't just go find that user as easily, right? I can do some things to enumerate the AD environment and AAD environment and things from Chris's, his actual privilege, but it's harder and it makes it harder for me to then target. And maybe it doesn't even accept an external email, or it only accepts it filtered this way, or there's all kinds of things that can play in for defenses against that non-public use account, if that makes sense.
So then I just want to add what you're really saying to me is, Chris, because you had to go on this tangent about local users, I was able to pull it out and go, oh, I got to finish my thought.
Yeah, exactly right. Thank you. So the last one we haven't covered. Let's do it.
Yes, service accounts. And I think this one...
You did, Johnny, touch on it a bit with those external parties, service accounts doing things on the systems. Like you did touch on
that. So let me ask you a question, because this is one that has bothered me for a long time. Not service accounts themselves, but the lack of automated identification for what should be classified as a service account. Go back 20 years. When you'd stand up accounts for things like CIS, that kind of thing, it was very clear what you created was a service account. So we did a very poor job of defining in the user creation, like fill in what this user does. What is this user role for?
Instead, they use the notes to put passwords in it.
Oh, don't get me started on that. But then fast forward to where we are today, and it's like a lot of the users that we call service accounts are not traditional service account. They are a third party, whether it's a person or a thing, not my problem, that is getting into my environment to perform a function or task.
Well, so now you're getting into this better or larger definition of a service account, right? Because in my mind, I think the old definition has probably been modified to become what we're looking at today. But I'll say also a couple things. Number one, service accounts become way less frequent when you see modern infrastructure in play. When
Sure.
you're not dealing with running a SQL server, you're not doing these IIS host user. Even when you talk about working with those third-party service providers, they come in as a guest or an external user. You can easily identify that's what they are. They're being authenticated through that mechanism, so it's easier to filter. But I think to the core of this was made to service accounts and things, to your point, that aren't logged into by a normal human. They're signed in and used for some function. And I would say those are becoming less and less in that definition. I think you're seeing less of those because of the less infrastructural dependence. But I do think it calls to a conversation of, this is still about identity. It's still about some pseudo human. Let's think about API keys, for example.
Yeah.
An API key is the modern service account in my mind, right?
Yes.
It's I use this API key and it accesses, and it's often tied to a fake user, right? If you look at even ConnectWise's implementation, you make a John Smith API key and right. And so you have those kind of things. So that's my thoughts on it. Service accounts are changing, I guess, to put it in the John Madden answer.
Well, you see the authentic, let's just use backup as an example. We see that a lot. Hey, I have a user that logs into your machine to perform this function to create the executable, when we saw a lot of more traditional built-in backup functionality being leveraged with a third-party tool that was then putting that data somewhere else, as opposed to the actual built-in Microsoft tool doing it. That's where I guess I'm kind of coming from. Like today's job task of identifying service accounts or local user accounts that are not tied to people, that is a lot more, that is difficult today, moreover, than it was.
But what's funny about that is it goes back to that book that Juan and Wes and Marnie and I wrote, right?
Oh yeah,
it really goes back to
the MSP Owner's Handbook. This
that one. Not even to be a humble plug, and I even have my pink pants on. It's pretty dope.
I have that on my list here.
Salmon, salmon. But no, I think if we think about that, you're seeing a world of have and have-nots. If you are that Matt's company that is identity centric, that is all SaaS, that is all extensibility, then what becomes a service account, and even what do I back up, is very different. I would just use native offsite syncing for the things that are documents in desktop and have since 2017. And anything I use out there is their shared responsibility with me. And most of it is just me handing off an assertion of, is Chris supposed to be able to sign into this or not? And all that comes back into my identity provider. So when you're talking about trying to find 5.5 and service accounts, they're extremely apparent. They can be extremely well defined because there aren't many of them, and they're mostly APIs stored somewhere and secrets.
So candidly, we need to be vigilant
shift in it. I think it's easier.
There's a vigilance here that needs to happen, right? That as solution providers implementing these safeguards, you're not necessarily going to be like, oh yeah, we got that covered, because like you said, you're describing the scenarios where it's not as prevalent as it was 5 years ago, especially companies that are building today in the cloud.
Well, and great call out. Yeah, great call out. And it is different and more important when you're building software too in the cloud. Even if you are using function services, if you're a code producing entity, then you definitely get into a lot more service accounts that you create on your own behalf that are much more, back to your point, hard to identify. And the reason I bring this up is it is hard for people to identify it as MSPs because you have a mixed bag of those infrastructural versus non-infrastructural players. You have people that do still have an AD forest that lives in their world, that runs their one line of business app and then serves as the AD sync hybridization over to the cloud. And now when I want to destroy you, I'm going to destroy you from that vulnerable infrastructural side to get to the cloud. And I'm going to use that as my pivot point, right? And so
I'm going to destroy you.
I'm fair about it. I just don't want to lie to people.
Yeah, I just want you to know that when you wake up and you're smoldering.
You saw the one threat actor that called it. Well, there's one threat actor that called it a post-paid pen test. It was so brilliant. It was so well said. This is a post-paid pen test.
Yeah. That's how you get away with not using
ransomware for post-paid pen test.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I think we've covered Control 5. I think that I think our audience will hear again, as you say, the banter. I love having these conversations. I think that at some point we should expand some of these to other frameworks. I don't mean because we're not doing a good job with CIS, but I think like today, slipping that one in there,
just show the translative aspect of it.
I think that's really important. And I think as those of you listening, like CSF, they just added the latest pillar to the framework, which is governance. This is going to be, the paramount piece, I think, for any focused efforts on cybersecurity being embedded in your culture. Governance and leadership will be at the whatever you call it, precipice. It will be the focal point that makes this a reality. And so as this is continuing to develop, expect to hear more from us in talking about, like, hey, if you didn't notice, ISO just added these 11 categories. Why are they there? Why are they important? And it's not because we want you to go out there and just tackle frameworks, but it's recognizing that while we all have different goals with frameworks as far as what types of data that they're focusing their energy on, they are all learning to start playing more and more alike with regards to how to do it.
Yep.
Any last thoughts, Matt, before I let you go?
Interesting that what's also going to be interesting about it, if we ever dive into other frameworks, is I'm super well versed in CIS. I will have to actually think and struggle like everybody else while we talk about these as we translate it, these other safeguards.
I'm sensing 171A coming soon.
Oh, that's going to be a blast. The problem with that is I'm going to say it, and then Jacob Horn's going to stab me in the eye for getting two words
that's
wrong.
what I was thinking of. Is
we did something like that to bring him.
Fair. All right. Well, Matt, I know you're busy,
awesome.
And I appreciate it. For everybody listening, thanks, and have a great week.